All right, hello everyone. Welcome to class. Today we're going to be talking about a very exciting, interesting subject, the Crimean War. Anyone familiar with the Crimean War? Anyone ever heard of this? Anyone know what it is at all? A lot of blank stares, nods to
Nope.
contrary. No one knows.
Nope.
Okay, that's okay, because that's what today is for. Today we're going to learn all about this, and we're going to learn about some of the very important historical implications of it, and some of the figures that served and what their impact was. So if we can change our slide. I want to start with just an image here. This is a painting of the Siege of Sevastopol. This is one of the major conflicts of the Crimean War. And if you can see, you can make out, this is trench warfare. And this is really the first time in world history that you have trench warfare where, you have a battalion dig in and really fight tooth and nail with artillery fire, munitions, over a field of battle in this way. So this is happening in the 1850s, 1853 to 1856. So just to give you a frame of reference, we're talking about Europe, we're talking about major European powers during this time. But what I want to do first of all is I want to introduce you to a little quotation here. Can I have a volunteer to read this quote out loud? If you want to go ahead.
Okay. I have now said all that I wish to say at this time, but a heavy thought overpowers me. Perhaps it should not have been said. Perhaps what I have said belongs to one of those evil truths which, unconsciously concealed in the soul of each man, should not be uttered, lest they become pernicious, as the lees of wine should not be shaken, lest it be thereby spoiled. Where is the expression of good which should be imitated in this sketch? Who is the villain, who the hero? All are good and all are evil. The hero of my tale, whom I love with all the strength of my soul, whom I have tried to set forth in all his beauty, and who has always been, is, and always will be most beautiful, is the truth.
All right, so this is a pretty deep quote about war by Leo Tolstoy. Is anyone here familiar with Tolstoy at all? Well, he wrote War and Peace. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that title. And he's one of the most famous novelists of the 19th century. And he served in the Crimean War. So what I want you guys to do right now is just brainstorm a little bit about what you think this quote means, what his ideas on war are. What do you think his view of the war was? If it was a positive thing, if there was anything glorious about it. And maybe just take out a sheet of paper and write down a couple of thoughts. Just anything that comes to mind. No pressure or anything like that, but just a couple of sentences on maybe what you think he felt about war, who the good guys were, who the bad guys were. All right, so anyone have anything they'd like to share, any ideas that came to mind or anything? Brandon?
It kind of feels like no matter what, whether you're good or evil, I feel like the truth will set you free no matter what happens.
So the power of truth is very important. Tom?
I found the all are good, all are evil thing interesting. I feel like he doesn't find anyone to be the villain or anyone else. Everyone's kind of at fault for fighting in this war. That's why it seems like he's against it.
So war is almost evil just in itself? Or
Right.
Anyone else? That's some good observations. I think that this kind of speaks to the gravity of the war and how it, though a lot of people don't really know about it, it was significant and it did inspire a lot of great minds to, pacifism in the case of Tolstoy. after he served in the war, he became kind of a noted pacifist who was against war entirely. So if we could go to the next slide. So where the heck is Crimea, right? That's probably the question on everyone's mind. What's he talking about right now? Okay, so Crimea is this little kind of island or peninsula on the Black Sea. If you know your European geography, we've got Russia up here, obviously. And then this is kind of where the Ottoman Empire is at the time, is in this area. France and Great Britain. These are going to be kind of the major powers that I'm talking about, so keep that in mind. If we can go to the next slide. This is the meat and potatoes, as they say, of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk about who was involved in the war, what their significance was, and what the whole point of the conflict was. So, on one side of the war, you have the Russian Empire. That's kind of your traditional Russian forces dating back to, hundreds of years. The Russian Empire has been very powerful up to this point. They're gaining power at this time. And on the other side, you have the French, who have just underwent a revolution. They have a new emperor in Napoleon III. You also have Great Britain, who is just a recent ally of France. They've just kind of gotten into some diplomatic relations where they're having some tentative treaties together and alliances after the Napoleonic Wars, where Britain and France are traditionally seen as enemies up until this point. And the Ottoman Empire. And is anyone familiar with the Ottomans? No? Well, a little bit. So-so for Tom. The Ottomans are declining in power all through the 19th century. It's kind of Turkey, Austria, Hungary. That area is known as the Ottoman Empire. And they are also fighting on the side of Great Britain and France. So let's kind of just go through a quick timeline of events. Like I said, in 1851, you've got a coup d'etat in France. That's going to put Napoleon III in power. He's, creating a new French Republic. And that's sort of the driving force behind the war, because Napoleon, he gets power and he says he wants to expand his empire. He wants to take back the Holy Lands for France. He thinks that they have a legitimate claim to them. And of course, Russia is not happy about that at all. Russia, has treaties that they've signed that give them limited power over the Holy Lands. And you guys familiar with the Holy Lands, what we're talking about when we say that? What areas we're talking about? We're talking about Israel, Palestine, modern-day Lebanon, these countries. Traditionally, there's been a lot of conflict over this area. It's very important to the three religions of the book, the Abraham. So, France thinks that they deserve the Holy Lands. They think they deserve a claim to them. So they make a pretty big power play. They start sending troops into the area known as the Crimean, as I said. And the Ottoman Empire is sort of forced to recognize the legitimacy of the French claims by a combination of diplomatic kind of strong arming as well as the threat of troops. So the Ottomans were neutral before France kind of makes this big power play. And that's what makes Russia dispute their authority, and Britain gets involved by trying to be in a diplomatic situation, trying to work things out between all the powers, and it kind of becomes a big mess. And they obviously fail to negotiate a treaty. Relations start to dissolve, they start to break down, and it ends with the Ottoman Empire declaring war on Russia, and subsequently Britain and France also declare war on Russian Empire. And this little territory of the Crimea becomes a big scene where all these major powers are struggling, and there's a lot of death and destruction, and it's pretty awful. So what I want to do now is I want to talk about some of the individual figures that served in the war and that you might recognize or you may know something about. And if we can change the slide. The first is Tolstoy. We saw the quote from Tolstoy earlier. You guys know about War and Peace, and he also wrote Anna Karenina and the Sebastopol sketches. He wrote a series of sketches that were detailing his experiences in the war, that kind of went through what he experienced and how he saw it and what he thought the purpose of it was. So we read the quote from the Sebastopol sketches, and it really changed his perspective and really kind of opened his eyes to what war was really about in the modern sense. Florence Nightingale, anyone? Florence Nightingale, yeah. You know anything you'd like to share?
I've heard of this person, but I
Heard the
don't
name.
really know much about it.
Yeah, a lot of people have heard the name before, they don't necessarily know what she did or what her significance was. She actually, she was a nurse, as we see here, during the Crimean War, and she was responsible for introducing a lot of modern practices to nursing. Sanitation, cleanliness, those types of things. She opened some of the first nursing schools. So this was kind of a big deal, and this was part of a big wave of modernizing medicine that was going on at this time, and especially Nightingale is associated with this movement. William Howard Russell, anyone? No journalism majors in here? No, of course not, we're all education majors. So William Howard Russell is a journalist. He's in the Crimean War, and he's one of the first wartime journalists, just period. He's actually serving in the field, and modern technology at this time was allowing him to send weekly dispatches back to London, back to Great Britain, and that was really swaying public opinion about the war. So until this time, it was the government that really controlled what people knew about the war, and it was on a delay, because posts took weeks or months even to travel from the front to back home. And William Howard Russell, he's sending on the telegraph, they're getting there instantly, or very much closer to instantly. And this actually leads to political upheaval back home in Britain in the years following the war, as people realized that the reasons for the war and the reasons that they were involved may not have been as legitimate as they had thought or they had been led to believe. So, if we can go to the next slide. Is there one?
No.
Forward. I think we're about ready to wrap it up then at this point. Later on in the day, we're going to take a look at some of these figures individually, and I'm going to break you off into groups, and we'll study, we'll read pieces by each of them, and then we'll come together and talk about more specifically in greater detail what each of the figures did and why they were important and what their significance is moving forward. All right, thanks guys.